So we're at it again, back to the ABC. They're actually wanting us to talk about our pollinator program that we're going to try and implement for all the towns. So here's an opportunity to get a shout out and maybe get some crowd support behind the idea of getting some gardens that have got some flowers that have got some bees in it. So let's see if we can rally the troops.
Good morning, ABC.
Good morning, how you going? Mark here.
Just push hard on the right door.
No worries. Hey Matt, how you doing, champ?
Good.
That's the way.
Thanks
Good
for
to
coming
see you
in.
again. Yeah,
Yeah,
no
you
worries.
too.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Steve, mate.
Bruce Springsteen and the Hungry Heart. ABC Riverland, Thursday, the 29th of August. Warming up, thank goodness. With a cold start this morning with frost about the place. I reckon Loxton copped it fairly well this morning too. I got quite a few photos of rain around those parts this morning. But looks like it might happen again tomorrow. 0 is our minimum tonight. So we'll wait and watch what happens there. 9:10. It's one of the first things that I watch from my YouTube feed. And when I checked in this morning, the Bush Bee Man channel has more than 25,000 subscribers these days. Mark deCaux from Loxton is the Bush Bee Man, but in the episode that came out earlier this week, he was talking about a different part of the beekeeping process rather than looking after the bees and harvesting the honey. Pollination is a major part of what bees do within our environment, and they need a bit of help with that. Mark has what seems like a pretty simple idea to help them along. We just need to get on board. Mark deCaux, good morning.
Good morning, Matt. How are you? Thanks for having us in.
No worries. Now, just talking on frost before we get into the subject at hand here, was it pretty bad this morning? I know you're from Loxton. So.
Well, my toes are still cold. So give you some idea how cold it was. There wasn't. You couldn't have gone skating on our back lawn, which sometimes when it's a really bad frost you can do that. But yeah, no, it was definitely crisp.
Yeah. I saw quite a few white photos of the surrounds this morning. So, I mean, it's an exciting time of year for beekeeping. Coming into spring. Are the bees starting to get up and about again now?
Oh yeah, they're starting to get excited. I was going through a few boxes the other day, and they were like, starting to crank up. So I've been on the almonds, which actually gets their brood started, and so they're starting to get ready for spring. Well, the next lot of flowers that come out. So hopefully there's enough nectar for them to go to. That's the next thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's actually funny because since I've been watching your channel, and with the almond trees that are now along the highway that we can see quite easily, I now notice all the boxes at the end of the rows, there to help with the pollination.
Yeah,
so
for sure. Yeah,
getting the
right.
education from you, Mark.
Yes. And you notice all the trucks everywhere with all the bees, the bee little forklifts
I
and
haven't
little
noticed
crane.
that so much. Yeah.
Yeah, if you look sort of either early in the morning, they'll be sort of coming and going, or late in the evening, you can see all the bee trucks everywhere. It's like bee freeway around here at the minute. I was saying to the wife yesterday when there was a couple going past, oh, that forklift's pretty good. That looks nice. We'll have that. She's like,
well, that's a whole other story we could talk about as well with your escapades with trucks and things like that.
Oh, Lord, let's leave that alone.
Okay.
I've got a bit better truck coming now, hopefully.
Yeah, I saw that episode. So, yeah, and we won't be taking the radiator cap off.
No, none of that. Oh, golly gosh. Oh, no. Anyway, my poor uncle, who was a bit of a truck driver, rang me up and said, what are you doing? Have I taught you nothing?
Clearly not.
Yeah, clearly not.
Well, let's talk about the episode earlier this week, which was talking about pollination. Mm-hmm. And now, before we get to what you were talking about in the video, can you just explain what pollination is for bees and why it is so important?
Yeah. Well, actually, in that episode, I was probably more talking about feeding the bees, and actually, like, pollination is what they do for us as humans, like with the almonds and the apples and the pears and blueberries and blackberries and all the cool stuff we like to eat, which is what the bees are really capable of doing and do a great job. What I was sort of talking about is more about the pollinators in general, like not just bees, but our native bees and even some of the really cool butterflies and stuff that we have. Yeah. They actually need a nectar source to actually feed on. Okay. And my theory was, we've got all this fabulous public land around here, and I thought the council's doing a good job anyway, planting trees and doing stuff. All we need to do is tweak things a little bit, and they could be nice flowering plants that the pollinators could use to feed on. They look cool for us, and it would help the pollinators to, stay alive and be fed and multiply.
Okay, so just to get the terminology right here, pollinators and pollination is what happens. The bees and the insects are the pollinators.
Yes.
Pollination is what happens for us, so we can have all that. Mm-hmm. But it's the nectar that's the important bit.
Yes, the nectar and the pollen that the ladies actually use to feed on. because the insects, they've developed to feed on flowers which produce nectar and pollen. And so they need a good pollen source and a good nectar source that goes throughout the season. Usually, because as you can say, there's 4 seasons. So we need to actually think about planting pollinating feeding plants for those 4 seasons.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
And I thought if I could get the councils on board, or, I mean, it can start with the schools. They're really keen. So start with some of them to plant some, like get their gardener to think about planting trees and stuff that the pollinators will enjoy.
Yeah, sure.
And I figure, well, it can't be much of a stretch to get the council involved, all the public lands, and they do a good job.
Yeah, exactly. Mark deCaux is the bush bee man. We're talking about a very simple tweak we might be able to do just to make things a little easier for pollinators like bees to do their work that they do around our environment. So you were having a look around in that episode, and you did find quite a few plants that were already in there that are actually pretty good.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's. I mean, I know the council probably. I don't know whether they did it on purpose, but I'm pretty sure they didn't. But they have done a great job, and I don't see why it would be that big an impasse to actually get a bit of consulting and actually have a bit of research and actually plant plants that are pretty to look at, but are also a good food source. I mean, it's like when I drive through Berry, I get quite excited when I go through the roundabout in Berry with opposite the post office there.
Yeah.
And they've put lavender and rosemary on the roundabout as a little hedge.
Yep.
And I get quite warmed. I think, well, that's kind of cool. I don't know if they did that on purpose for me, but I go through there and I go, look at that. How hard would it be for us to do that? Not necessarily lavender and rosemary everywhere, but there's other really cool plants that look good and are productive.
Yeah, for sure.
How hard would that be?
And how important is it that we do these sort of jobs? Because I mean, you know, we hear about, you know, save the bees and all that sort of stuff, and make it easier for them. I mean, we can plant our own plants in the garden, but how important is it to have that available for them to get out there?
Well, I liken it to the fact that, because people think the bees are just doing their own thing, and you know they don't give them a lot of thought. But if you think about them, they're very similar to if you've got a paddock full of sheep.
Okay.
You know, look at it that way. So you've got
I'll go with you here.
Yep. So you've got a paddock full of sheep, and they've got to have a certain amount of grass to eat, and there's a stocking rate, obviously, if you're into sheep farming. And bees aren't much different but they're eating flowers, and well, not eating flowers, they're using flower sources, and so there's only a certain amount of bees that can survive with a certain amount of food.
Right.
So the more food, obviously, the better the possibility for pollinators to survive.
Yeah, sure. Okay, that makes sense.
If that makes sense, yeah.
Just to play devil's advocate here, it's 9:17, we're talking to Mark deCaux, who's the bush bee man this morning. Just to play devil's advocate here for a second, we're talking about, you know, planting, you know, good plants for bees in public spaces and things like that, which, like you say, it couldn't be that hard to do.
Yeah.
Will the bees actually use them? Because it's a busy, like some of them are very high traffic areas that, you know, might not be entirely suitable for bees to be around.
They are very good negotiators.
Okay.
Trust me on this. If you went down to that roundabout that's got stuff going everywhere, they'd be there. They're there feeding and having a great time. People are walking past, getting their mail, doing all their human activities. The only time bees get excited, if you're going to get concerned about, you know, attracting bees to an area, and the only time they'll actually get excited is if they're actually their beehive is there, and the guard bees will protect the little area around that. But as far as the forager bees, unless you tread on them or grab them and squeeze them, they're not going to bother you.
Okay.
Because I was talking to a lady the other day who's got a really beautiful kindergarten, and they've got really lovely flowering trees, and they've got bees going everywhere, and heck, kindergarten kids, well, they'd have to be, you know, susceptible and small and curious.
Yeah, for sure.
And they haven't had any bee stings, so...
Right, okay. So the bees really don't care what we do.
But they're not interested.
For the most part, anyway.
Yeah, unless you buy their home. If you go to where they're nesting and their actual immediate... Well, it depends on the bee, but it's generally about a 10-metre radius that they'll put guard, and then they won't even actually attack you unless they think you're a threat.
Oh, okay.
So
if you see a bee and, you know, you around you, don't panic about it too much. Just go about what you're doing.
Yeah, it's not interested in you at all.
Because you haven't got any pollen or anything like that,
exactly.
or any nectar for them to actually eat. So they're not going to be worried about you.
No, quite often they'll land on you and just have a little sniff around, and then off they'll go.
All right. Yeah, so an interesting thought there. Have you progressed any further with the idea, or are you just putting it out there as something that we could potentially do?
Well, that's what we're doing here today.
Yes.
we're using the power of the media to push this idea out there, and hopefully we can get some public support to influence the council. I haven't actually gone to the council and put myself up there. like I said about doing a submission to the council, I think I'll just send them the DVD or send them the content, as my son would say.
Yes, for sure, for sure.
But I don't. Yeah, like I said, I don't think it could be that hard. Surely it couldn't be that complicated.
Yeah.
And everybody, of course, can do their own part in their own gardens, as you say. Plant a tree for the future, and plant some flowering plants that produce nectar and pollen and help the pollinators.
Yeah, that's right. And it's not just bees; it's like butterflies and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, butterflies and our native bees, the blue-banded bees. They need something. And if you like tomatoes, you should help them out because they are really good for pollinating tomatoes.
Oh, right. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Learn something new every day.
Yeah.
So we are coming into spring, which is a busy time for bees at beekeeping. You're really going to have to go through all your hives and all that sort of stuff now.
Yeah.
Is it looking okay? I mean, I know dry conditions haven't been good for other areas of farming. So how is it looking for bees?
Well, in the mallee here, it's going to be pretty tough. It looks like there's usually the large cap mallee will start flowering this time of year, but that's looking like it hasn't hardly budded up very much. So we're probably going to have to go further afield. I've got some sites down in the hills, or we might have to go down to the blue gum, which is sort of down towards the southeast. They've had a lot more rain down there.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of falls coming from that area.
Yeah.
Having that lower rainfall, does that mean you have to feed more often?
It can involve feeding, or it involves finding a spot to go that has had some
physically
more rain.
moving them to where they can go.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting idea, Mark. Let's hope that something comes from that, because, like you say, it might not be that hard to make that step to having good plants in place. And best of luck with coming into the new season and keeping busy with everything you've got to do.
Yeah, thank you. Just as a footnote, it's actually a really good touristy idea too, because there's a really big interest around the whole world about pollinators and pollinator towns and pollinator things. So it could create a very good tourist attraction. That might be an incentive for the area as well.
Yeah, not a bad idea. All right. Mark, thanks very much for coming in this morning.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Mark deCaux, the bush bee man. What do you think? You reckon we could do it? I mean, obviously there's some plants there at the moment which are good for pollinators, but it might not be that much of a stretch. We'll have to investigate this a little bit further.
Cool. Well, that seemed to be pretty well received. I just having a thought. You know how when you're walking along and your brain just turns on and you have a bit of is that called a moment? And I was just thinking, we could start a whole movement. Maybe we could actually get this going across the whole countryside. So if you're thinking that your town could have some pollinating plants in it, well, perhaps send them the DVD. Oh, no, it's a DVD. I keep calling it a DVD. Perhaps send them the episode about making a pollinator-friendly place. Perhaps you could even get me involved and I'll come along and stir them up. And we can start a whole national movement. How would that be for fun? Hell, let's not stop in Australia. What's wrong with doing this across the whole planet? Anyway, sounds like a plan to me.